Okay, camera's rolling. Audio is rolling. All right, Tim. Action.
Hello, my name's Tim Malone and I'm a retired American history teacher. And I've been taping my lectures in retirement. I have a YouTube channel where I've put my taped lectures. Tim Malone History Lectures. Search Tim Malone History Lectures on YouTube. Today, I want to talk about Hiroshima and nuclear weapons. I have two PowerPoints, one on each, and I don't know which one I should do first. Now, of course, the last lecture I put up was on World War II. So chronologically, Hiroshima. Well, no, nuclear weapons preceded Hiroshima by a couple of months. I don't want to get hung up on this. I'm just going to talk about Hiroshima first. Then we'll backtrack and talk about the nature of nuclear weapons. And the point I want to make about that as a preview is that we've talked in these lectures, and I'm, in terms of analyzing the past, turning points, crucial developments that shaped history, a bit of a cliche. Technological determinism. Technological determinism. We talked about that when we talked about the Industrial Revolution. And it's simple that in the category of events that historians study, the development of machines, the development of mechanical devices is number one. That human beings living the way we live today, August 2025, has been determined more by the development of technology than any other category of events. Technological determinism. And aren't we all in this day and age technological determinists? I think it's a reasonable assumption that the machines have taken over. The machines are driving history. Technological development. I mean, the big thing now, of course, is AI, artificial intelligence. But it's always something. Ever since when? The Industrial Revolution, the late 1700s in England. Technological determinism. The bombs rule. But we'll come back to that. Let's talk about Hiroshima. Now, this is August 29th, 2025. So back on August 6th was Hiroshima Day. And that's what it's called, Hiroshima Day. And if you watch the news, the ABC, NBC, CBS nightly news at 5:30, on any August 6th in my lifetime, including the one just a couple of weeks ago, they're going to talk at some point in the newscast, they're going to talk about it being Hiroshima Day, August 6th. It's one of the 3 days from World War II that still resonate in the current culture. There's probably more than three, but the three big ones are Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, when we got into the war because the Japan attacked us at Pearl Harbor, and then a couple of days later, Hitler declared war on us. D-Day, June 6th. Every D-Day. On the news, they'll note this is the 81st? This year, on June 6th, it was the 81st anniversary of the landings in France. And then, of course, Hiroshima Day. Now, it used to be that, and again, August 15th, September 2nd, which is the day Japan surrendered. But there was a VJ Day. When I was a kid, a while ago, there was a couple of other dates. There was May 8th, 1945, VE Day, Victory in Europe. Germany surrendered. And that was on calendars when I was a kid. VE Day. And then on August 15th, VJ Day, Victory over Japan. Now, those have disappeared from calendars and are not mentioned in the news. VJ Day, Victory over Japan, has been replaced, you might think of it this way, by Hiroshima Day. And then August 6th, 7th, 8th, August 9th, Nagasaki, the second nuclear bombing of a Japanese city. Now, so again, just a couple weeks ago, we went through it again. Hiroshima Day, controversial. Did we have to do that? Was that right? And the argument that still resonates today with Americans is Japan was giving indications at Iwo Jima and Okinawa of fanatical resistance. Everybody should die. Every Japanese person should die defending Japan. There were Japanese leaders at the time who said the end of this war is when the last Japanese person of any kind is killed. Japanese, even the babies, should resist to the death. And that's what was going on in Iwo Jima and Okinawa, these islands that we invaded on the way to Japan. Fanatical, suicidal resistance. And the idea was that if we had to invade the mainland of Japan, the four main islands, to end the war, that the entire Japanese population would resist to the death, and American casualties would be, well, some people say 1 million American casualties, which would have been more than the whole war up till then, or almost. So we didn't want to do that. So we nuked them. And it seems plain, August 6th, nuke, August 9th, nuke, August 15th, Japan surrenders. Common sense, right? Nuke, nuke, quit. So when the nuclear weapons are given credit for ending the war, it's not unreasonable. Makes sense. However, as a historian, I believe that that's been wrong all these years. Now, of course, as Americans, we invented the bomb. So we wanted it to matter. We wanted it to be necessary. We still do. 80 years later, we still want it to be useful. Yes, we had to do this. We had to do this. Because again, last lecture I promised to talk about bombing in American culture. And I don't know, I'll mention it here some. We had been bombing Japan for 6 months, more, already with conventional weapons. They call it conventional weapons. And in March 1945, April, May, June, July, 5 months, we've been bombing Japan for more than 5 or 6 months with B-29s, our new Super Fortress, it was called, airplanes, flying out of flying out of Iwo Jima and Saipan, and putting 300, 400, 500 B-29s over Japanese cities. And originally, this brand new Super Fortress was going to bomb Japanese factories and military bases from 30,000 feet, which is where you fly commercially now. And it didn't work worth a damn. The jet stream was discovered, and you couldn't hit nothing from 30,000 feet. So, General Curtis LeMay, the head of the Bomber Command in the Pacific, came up with a new plan. Japanese cities were constructed largely of paper and wood, flammable. So he brought the plane down, not switched from day to night bombing, brought the planes down to 5,000 feet and packed them full of napalm, incendiaries, jellied gasoline. And they devastated 67 Japanese cities were firebombed successfully, in that most of those 67, over half of the town was burned. I mean, there's conflagrations, firestorms. I guess you'd have to say that in terms of strategic bombing, oh, here we go. There's tactical bombing where your airplanes bomb to support your army at the front. Tactical bombing. Then there's strategic bombing, a concept that was invented between World War I and World War II, where you fly deep into the enemy territory and you bomb their economic, transport, communications, infrastructure to weaken the soldiers at the front. Strategic bombing, also called terror bombing, because the Germans and the Japanese early in the war, now their air forces were not built for strategic bombing. England and the United States are going to start the real deal. Strategic bombing the opponent's civilian, let's see, total war. Strategic bombing is part of total war. Now, we talked about total war, and that really the only total war were World War I and World War II. That's debatable, but for simplicity's sake, I think that's a good argument. World War I and World War II, total war, where the nation is totally mobilized for war. So therefore, if you've got total mobilization, the thinking is it's okay to attack the civilian infrastructure deep inside. Fly over the armies at the front and you bomb the factories and the rail hubs and the airports, naval yards, the infrastructure. It's a controversial concept, strategic bombing. And it's certainly true that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were strategic bombing targets, cities. And by the time we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it had been well established in World War II that that was okay. We'd firebombed 67 Japanese cities. The reasons we attacked Hiroshima and Nagasaki was because they hadn't been burned yet. We wanted pristine targets to see what this new thing, this nuclear weapon, would do. Hiroshima. And to this day, a few weeks ago, the debate is, should we have done it? Now, of course, you're going to say, if we'd already firebombed, which was in some ways very similar to what happened with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if we'd already set that precedent, and if the Germans had bombed London during the Blitz in 1940, and England had bombed Germany, nighttime bombing, the English bombed in Europe now against Hitler. The English bombed at night, and the Americans bombed during the day. And now the Americans, precision bombing, the Norden bomb site, top secret. We pretended, which I think is what it ended up being, that we were hitting factories, precision bombing, Americans in the day. Precision bombing was not possible at the night. So early on, 1942, as soon as the British could get enough bombers and take control of the skies, they were bombing Germany at night and dropping their bombs right downtown, first in Maine. No pretense the British had of bombing factories or naval ports or the such. So now today, that's against the rules of war. You're a war criminal today if you did what the British, the Americans, did in World War II. And I'll come back to that, the moral aspect of it. But again, most Americans say we had to do it. And look what happened. Bomb, bomb, quit. Obvious that it worked. Now what I like to do is I like to say, not so simple. Not so simple. That there's between August 6th and August 9th, between Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there's another date that's of the utmost importance in the debate in the history of the nuclear bombing. You're saying, what? There's only 2 days. 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. Yes, there's a day, a very crucial day, that most Americans aren't taught about when we talk about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that is August 8th. August 8th. Between them. And you're like, well, what the hell happened on August 8th? On August 8th, 1945, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. What? Even though the Japanese had attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor, and we got into the war against Japan. And then, for some reason, Hitler declared war on the United States, honoring his treaty with Japan. Hitler never honored a treaty in his life, but he honors the one with Japan to declare war on the, by far, the largest economy, theoretically, the most powerful nation in the world, the United States. Hitler declares war on us because FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, I think, would have had trouble declaring war on Germany after the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor. Of course, we were going to declare war on Japan. But Roosevelt wanted to fight Hitler more than he wanted to fight Japan. And Hitler was more of a threat to the United States than Japan. No, I don't want to go down that road. So Hitler declares war on us. The Soviet Union is at a blood war, just a terrible Eastern Front war with the Germans during World War II. It's the Russians that take Berlin at the end of the war. But at Potsdam, or was it Yalta, the big three, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin met. This was in, January or February of 1945? And at that meeting, Roosevelt and Churchill wanted Stalin to come into the war against Japan after the war in Europe was over. And Stalin agreed to come in 3 months. 3 months after the end of the war in Europe, the Soviet Union was going to declare war against Japan, way out in the Far East. Because Japan and the Soviet Union had not been at war. Now again, the equal signs don't add up, but that's the way it was. And Manchuria, the Soviet Union had a 1,200 for 1,300 mile border with Japanese-controlled Manchuria, which is now part of China. And so the war in Europe ended on May 8th. June, July, August. 3 months. August 8th. And Stalin was right on time. He transported 1 million Soviet troops from Germany to the border of Manchuria without the Japanese detecting it. And the Red Army in 1945, the Army of the Soviet Union, the Red Army, kick ass. You don't want any part of them. They'd gutted the German army at great cost, but they were the best army in the world. No, the United States, I can't say that, right? In 1945, and they'd moved 1 million men and 10,000 tanks to the border with Japanese-controlled Manchuria. And on August 8th, 1945, right on time, the Russians attacked the Japanese in Manchuria. And now this is the Grade B, this is the backup team, Japanese Army. It's not the front ranks of the Japanese Army. They're in China, or on Okinawa and Iwo Jima. And they don't fight to the death, the Japanese Army in Manchuria. They throw down their guns and they run. And I would have run from the Red Army too. It's studied, the Soviet attack on Manchuria on August 8th, 1945, is studied in war colleges about blitzkrieg, about armored warfare. There was going to be 1 million Soviet troops at the tip of the Korean Peninsula, a couple of 100 miles from Japan, in a couple of weeks. Now you say, well, we firebombed Japanese cities and we nuked a couple of them to get them to quit so we didn't have to invade the Japanese islands and take all those casualties. The reality is we wouldn't have had to invade Japan. Stalin and the Russians would have done it. And then we would have had to split, at the best, we would have had to split the occupation of Japan with the Soviet Union, the commies. Just like we ended up splitting Germany. Just like we're going to end up splitting Korea. If we would have waited. Now Truman, the President of the United States, FDR died in April. Truman knew the August 8th date. He knew the Soviets were coming in the war on August 8th. He knew it. And by August 8th, see, back in the first of the year, 1945, Churchill and Roosevelt wanted the Soviets to come into the war. By August, they're like, oh, what did we do? We got Japan. We don't need the Soviets in this war. But there they were, 1 million battle-hardened, kick-ass Soviet troops invading Manchuria, making, tens and tens of miles a day in their blitzkrieg. They would have invaded Japan. And we didn't want that. We didn't want to split Japan with the Soviets, like we ended up Germany, Korea. No. So we dropped the nukes. Japan was on the verge of, now this is debatable, was Japan on the verge of surrender without the nukes? We say the nukes did it. Well, because we invented the nukes and look what we got. But that's why we nuked those cities. We could have just firebombed them, like the 67 other cities. No. Why? It wasn't for the Japanese. Hiroshima and Nagasaki weren't for the Japanese, it was for the Soviets. It was Joe Stalin. Well, you may be in now, but look what we got. Look what we got. And from the Japanese perspective, you can be occupied by, this is a historical question. Who would you rather be occupied by? The Americans or the Russians? The Americans, right? So the Japanese leadership, August 8th, their army in Manchuria is collapsing, running away. Here come the Reds, here come the Soviets, here comes Stalin. What are you going to do? Surrender as soon as you can to the Americans. Keep the Soviets out of Japan. Surrender to the Americans. Just them. Consent to occupation by the Americans. Just them. And it worked for the Japanese. It worked. They quit and got occupied by the Americans. See, I think that makes sense. See, that makes more sense than the Japanese, because the Japanese, they knew about nuclear weapons. They didn't have a nuclear weapons program, but they knew what these things were. They knew we were working on them. And again, the effect, the radiation is still killing Japanese. That's the added kicker, the radiation poison from nuclear weapons. Plus one plane, one bomb, not 800 planes. Nuclear weapons. That was for Stalin. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were to show Stalin. He may have this kick-ass army, but look what we got. And the Japanese, it worked for them. They got occupied by the Americans. Just the Americans. See, that makes more sense as a justification for using the weapons than, what, we're burning down a couple more Japanese cities? The debate about Hiroshima is lively and persistent, but most Americans don't understand the August 8th date, the Soviet entry into the war against Japan. Hiroshima Day. Every year the world notes the bombing, and the debate over the bombing is renewed. Was it necessary to end the war? Was it moral? Is strategic bombing moral? Now, today, most nations, not the United States, most nations have signed treaties banning strategic bombing. Well, you can still bomb factories and airfields, but you can't just fly over a city and drop bombs downtown, which of course is exactly what we did with the nukes, right? There was no pretense that we were attacking a military base or a ball bearings factory at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was accepted practice by then in the war, World War II, that you bombed first in Maine. We dropped those bombs right downtown. That's against the rules, well, at least the rules that most nations have signed on to today. You can't drop bombs downtown. You can't area bomb cities. You're a war criminal if you do that. War criminal. It's very interesting. I talked about August 8th. What happened on August 8th? The Soviet Union entered the war against Japan. Now I've debated people about dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and our firebombing of Japanese cities, because again, we dropped our firebombs right downtown. We just burned the towns down. Residential area, industrial area, commercial, it didn't matter. Just burned them out. And of course, again, the British had been doing that to Germany. Strategic bombing. I'm morally opposed to strategic bombing. And I think that Hiroshima and Nagasaki, especially if they were done not to end the war against Japan, but to show the Soviets a demonstration, killing, 80,000 people in Hiroshima and 50,000 people in Nagasaki, to show the Russians that we had this thing? That's not moral, is it? It's just not. And I don't know, I love my country, I love America, I understand, they were doing it. Well, no, they didn't do it to us. No American city had any bombs dropped on them in World War II. We were responding to the German bombing of Rotterdam, Netherlands, London during the Blitz, the V-2s and the V-1s, which of course you had to aim at something as big as a city. Because the Germans and the Japanese did that, we were okay doing it to them, although they didn't do it to us. We were seeking revenge for somebody else. Revenge, no. And again, leaving the nuclear bombs out of it, you can say that the strategic bombing of Japan worked. Because even taking the nukes out of it, Japan was on the verge of collapse, burning 67 of their cities. Most of them, over 50% of the town, was burned. And of course, thousands, 1 million during not even adding in the nuke casualties, we killed 1 million Japanese in March, April, May, June, July, August. Because, we bombed Japanese cities, conventional bombing, the day after Nagasaki. We kept bombing with conventional weapons. In 6 months, we killed 1 million Japanese. The numbers vary. I mean, when you get up to numbers like that, and the chaos of war, it's hard. People say, oh, it wasn't that many. Well, how many does it have to be? Now I want to talk a little bit more about nuclear weapons in general. And the first point I want to make about nuclear weapons, invented in 1945, it's 80 years, the nuclear age, 80 years. I think the most important point to make in 2025 about nuclear weapons is that your government, the government of the United States, doesn't want you to think very much about nuclear weapons. They would prefer you forget, in my opinion. They prefer that you would forget that they even exist. They don't want the average American thinking much, talking much, debating much about nuclear weapons and nuclear policy. They just as soon you forgot about them. Now here we have nuclear weapons, the most destructive weapon of war ever invented. One bomb pretty much destroyed Hiroshima. One bomb destroyed Nagasaki. And those were primitive, what we would call low yield today. The bomb at Hiroshima, a U-235 bomb, had a yield of 12,000 kilotons. No, 12,000 tons, 12 kilotons of TNT. In other words, the explosion was the equivalent of 12,000 tons of TNT, one bomb. Nagasaki, the plutonium bomb, we had two different kinds. Plutonium bomb had about a 20,000 tons of TNT, more powerful bomb, kilotons. And they were big bombs. Now, there's been progress in nuclear weapons since then. From the very beginning, when people said, after Einstein's work in the early 1900s, when it became clear, oh, hey, nuclear reactions, a rapid nuclear reaction, we could build bombs out of radioactive material. Once that was known, the next day, well, not the next day, but soon, scientists were like, well, geez, we could use one of these fission bombs. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were fission bombs. That is where you take big atoms and split them in a chain reaction. And you take the two parts or more that it's split into, and you weigh them, and they weigh less than the original atom. You split an atom, and the remnants, there's mass missing. What happened to the mass? It was converted to energy according to E equals mc squared. Doesn't take much matter to create a big explosion. Conversion to energy. I get to say that, E equals mc squared. Every teacher wants to say that, right? Fission bombs. U-235 and the man-made element in nuclear reactors, plutonium. But if you have that bomb, you can surround it with deuterium, you can surround it with isotopes of hydrogen, and the pressure and heat of the fission bomb promotes a thermonuclear reaction. A fusion bomb, wherein the heat and pressure of a fission explosion, you surrounded that bomb with deuterium and other elements of hydrogen, and they fuse. Like what happens in the sun. The sun is a fusion reaction, where hydrogen is fused into helium. And if you take the helium atom that results, and you take the hydrogen atoms before, there's matter missing. The helium atom weighs less than the original two hydrogen atoms, and the missing matter is converted to energy, E equals mc squared. Now, once you get to a fusion bomb, what as a kid we called hydrogen bombs, we called atomic bombs, A bombs, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, fission bombs, and then H bombs, hydrogen bombs. That was the nomenclature when I was a kid. That's pretty much gone by the board. Fusion bombs. Once you get to fusion, if you have the fission bomb to trigger a fusion reaction, there's no theoretical limit to the size of a bomb you can make. Let me repeat that. There's no theoretical limit to the size of a bomb you can make. That means you could make a bomb big enough to blow the earth to bits, literally. Now, again, I haven't kept up with this stuff like I did once in my life. When I was younger and I had kids, young children, I was, as a historian, kind of pessimistic. I'm still kind of pessimistic about the fact that the nuclear weapons are going to be used again someday. Nuclear war. It just, again, your government doesn't want you to think much about it, so it's not much in the news that the Soviet Union, date myself, that Russia and the United States still, despite the fact that unbelievably to me, pessimist back 30 years ago, Russia and the United States have built their nuclear arsenals down. They have less nuclear bombs now than they did 30 years ago. Whoa, unbelievable. A sign of hope. But that was back when the United States and Russia kind of got along. Now we're not getting along at all. And the fact that the United States is selling weapons to Ukraine to kill Russian soldiers, the two nuclear superpowers are that close, makes me nervous. Makes me nervous. And 50 years ago or 60 years ago, during the height of the Cold War, we wouldn't be doing that, and the Russians wouldn't be doing that. Everybody's forgotten about this sword of Damocles that's hanging over humanity's head. Thousands of nuclear weapons and big ones. Not Hiroshima and Nagasaki anymore. Thermonuclear, H-bombs. I read somewhere where an H-bomb weighing 400 tons. Now, you couldn't put that on a missile, but 400 tons would extinguish all life on Earth. Would blow such radioactive radioactive nucleoids into the atmosphere that it would ultimately kill all life. 400 tons. And we could do that. That would be a doomsday device, right? Doomsday. We could build a doomsday machine. We could. There's no theoretical limit to the size of a nuclear weapon we can build if you have the fission bomb to trigger it. Most Americans don't think about that. They don't know that. They don't realize it. We live in a nuclear shadow, and we have for 80 years. Nuclear weapons, the ultimate weapon. Unlimited destructive power. The ironic ultimate fruit of the Industrial Revolution. You can think of it that way. The ultimate cotton mills in England in the 1770s. Hydrogen bombs. And the nuclear age, progress. If the missiles ever fly, if there's a general exchange of nuclear weapons ever, with your dying breath, you'll say, damn, Industrial Revolution. We'd been better off staying peasants. The ultimate fruit of technology. Nuclear weapons, they provide the classic example of technological determinism. I talked about that earlier. Indeed, the machines already rule. One of the science fiction tropes, ever since Frankenstein in the early 1800s, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, one of the tropes of our science fiction is the machines take over. What's that Arnold Schwarzenegger franchise? Terminator? Skyfall or Sky somebody? Skynet. Thank you. Takes over. The machines take over. The machines have already taken over. Nuclear weapons rule. Again, let me repeat again. Your leaders don't want you to know that. The bomb has shaped history. Another point about nuclear weapons is the nuclear peace. No World War III. Weapons too powerful to use. No one can win a nuclear war. Boy, we can hope that our leaders now and in the future continue to abide by that fact. It's a fact, isn't it? No one wins a nuclear war. Even if these things blow up hundreds of miles from their targets, doesn't matter. I mean, the average U.S. bomb is 200 kilotons, 200, that'd be 10 times the Nagasaki bomb. We blew up, I think, we used to have 9 megaton bombs in our arsenal, 9 megatons, the equivalent of 9 million tons of TNT. Can you imagine a pile of 9 million tons of TNT? No. You don't want to be, that's like 20 miles across. I used to know all this stuff. I told you I went through a nuclear phase when I had young kids, and what conclusion did I got the government books and the effects of nuclear weapons. I still have that book. And and I was an expert. I knew more about it than 99% of Americans. I've kind of got off of it. I became convinced that it wasn't going to happen, I guess. Not going to happen. But I used to know all that stuff. Circular error probable, and, flight time of intercontinental ballistic missiles and all that. Mutual Assured Destruction, MAD was the acronym. MAD, yeah, it's MAD, only a madman. Mutual Assured Destruction. Both sides have arsenals, delivery systems, where the other side, even in a surprise first strike, couldn't get them all. And it doesn't take that many. What if the United States lost New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles within 5 minutes of each other through nuclear weapon? What would happen to the United States? 3 cities, let alone all the cities, top 50, top 100 cities. They got thousands of weapons, the Russians, thousands. We got thousands. Less thousands than we had before, but still thousands. Mutual assured destruction. See, I don't know why. You could make a case. Why does anybody ever think about anything else? And yet we don't think about it at all. Ho-hum. Nuclear reign of terror. Ho-hum. Nuclear weapons, like I said, the machines have taken over. The nuclear weapons have dramatically changed the calculus of war. No total war. You can't have total war, because total war, the concept, presupposes attacks on the other side's civilian infrastructure. And total war, you use your best weapon. Total war means nuking cities. Just like in World War II, it meant burning cities. The bombs rule, but Ukraine makes me nervous. Ukraine makes me nervous. And it makes you wonder, what the hell is Putin, President Putin of Russia, what is he thinking? He's a madman, isn't he? And now he's got another madman in the United States, Donald Trump. 2 madmen? I get nervous when I go down that road. Nuclear weapons, man. Nuclear weapons created the military context for the Cold War and the Vietnam War. We got with nukes, total war is gone, limited war is in, limited war. Limited war. I've talked about war before. I should do an entire lecture just on the concept of war, the history of war, the history of the concept of war. Because with the advent of nuclear weapons, total war, ultimate war, total mobilization, total use of your firepower. Civilians are as much targets as soldiers. Total war is out, at least between nuclear powers. So what? Limited war. Korea, Vietnam, Iran and Iraq. Not Iran, we never invaded Iran yet. Iraq and Afghanistan. Limited wars. Where the superpower, the nuclear power that's waging war, is well aware of the lines, well aware of avoiding nuclear war. Limited war. That's where we are. Limited war, which lends itself to bombing with conventional weapons, and since the 1990s with what's called precision weapons. Through the window. Now, my experience with thinking about strategic bombing and tactical bombing and limited war bombing is that there's scant difference between military and civilian targets. And our bombing campaign against the Serbs, NATO, and in the 1990s, and against Saddam Hussein before we invaded, got rid of him. And what's happening in Ukraine on both sides. The calculation is always precision. You can get away with killing people if you say, I wasn't trying to kill that baby. I wasn't trying. In fact, I take it, you hear this from the Israeli government now about Gaza. We take every opportunity to avoid civilian casualties. But everybody knows there's going to be civilian casualties when you bomb anything, even with these so-called laser-guided GPS precision. There's going to be civilian casualties. There always is. And how many babies do you have to kill? How many babies do you have to kill before it's immoral? Before you've crossed an ethical line? There was a nuclear arms race between the Soviets because and here's a good thing you can say about the United States. We had nuclear weapons from 1945 to 1949 exclusively. We were the only ones who had them. And we didn't nuke our enemies. What if Stalin would have had nuclear weapons, or Hitler would have had nuclear weapons first? Would they have shown such restraint? We rattled it at the Soviet Union when our monopoly, our 4 years of nuclear monopoly. We based bombers with nuclear weapons in Europe and in Japan. We forward-based nuclear weapons, which is pretty threatening to Russia at the time, during that 4-year period. But then in 1949, the Soviet Union got nuclear weapons. And the race was on. And at one point, the Soviet Union and the United States each had, in my recollection serves me correctly, over 30,000 nuclear bombs apiece. 30,000 apiece. Talk about redundant. I mean, there's only, about 100 cities, over 100,000 population in both the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, and the United States. And what if we lost the top 100 cities in the United States within 30 minutes? The top 100 cities nuked in 30 minutes. The end. It's not an exaggeration. Armageddon, right? It's not an exaggeration. Now, there'd be survivors, and fiction writers, science fiction writers, have tried to predict, have tried to create post-nuclear worlds. Oh, there's some of that stuff on right now. Post-nuclear landscapes, the world. That's a trope in our science fiction. But in my opinion, no one has ever imagined it correctly. No one has ever gotten it right. Because it's unimaginable. You can't imagine what a full-scale nuclear exchange, what would happen to the United States, what would happen to Illinois, which is where I am. You can't imagine it. It's beyond comprehension. And one final point about nuclear weapons is, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Hiroshima Day. We talked about that earlier in this lecture, about August 8th and Soviet entry into the war, and was the nuking necessary to get Japan to surrender, that controversy. Result of the development of this terror machine that affect the history of the world by just sitting there. They just sit. 80 years of just sitting. Technology.